childhood as a time of innocence, and for the most part that is true. But then there are cases that shake that assumption completely. Kids so young their school photos still showed baby teeth, yet what they did left entire courtrooms speechless. These are the youngest kids reacting to prison, and here's 20 of them. Jordan Brown. At 11 years old, he was already a regular hunter who spent weekends in the Pennsylvania woods with his dad, Chris Brown, and the two of them had made it a whole thing. Chris had even given Jordan a youth model .20 gauge shotgun as a Christmas gift, so hunting was just part of who Jordan was at that age. He lived with Chris and Chris's fiancée, Kenzie Houck, at their home in Wampum, Pennsylvania, a small community in Lawrence County. Kenzie was 26 and 8.5 months pregnant at the time. On the morning of the 20th of February 2009, Kenzie was found shot in the back of the head while lying in bed. Her unborn son did not survive either. Kenzie's 4-year-old daughter had alerted nearby tree workers roughly 45 minutes after Jordan and his stepsister had already boarded the school bus. Police found a spent shotgun shell along the path the children had walked to the bus stop, and Jordan's gun allegedly smelled as though it had been recently fired. Jordan was arrested the following morning and charged as an adult with first-degree murder in Lawrence County. After years of legal battles, Jordan was tried as a juvenile. In 2012, a judge found him delinquent, the juvenile equivalent of a guilty verdict, but that ruling was appealed and fought all the way to the top. In July 2018, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned the conviction in a unanimous 5-0 decision, finding that no DNA or fingerprint evidence had ever connected Jordan to the shooting, and that the physical evidence was equally consistent with someone else being responsible. He had already spent 7 years in juvenile detention by then. Jordan was exonerated at 20 years old. Christian Fernandez.
Christian Fernandez was just 12 years old when he killed his 2-year-old half-brother.
Born in Miami in 1999, his life had started under circumstances that were difficult from the very beginning. His mother was 12 years old when he was born, after being assaulted by a 25-year-old man who later went to prison, so Christian never had anything resembling a stable early childhood. By the time he was 2, both he and his mother had been placed in foster care together. By 8, he had been sexually assaulted by an older cousin. And then, just months before the crime that would put him in the national spotlight, his stepfather shot and killed himself in front of the entire family to avoid being arrested on child abuse charges. So by the time Christian was 12 years old, he had been through more than most adults ever face. In March 2011, he was at their Jacksonville, Florida, apartment looking after his 2-year-old half-brother, David Galarraga. Christian slammed David's head against a bookshelf more than a dozen times. David fell unconscious, and when their mother, Bianella Susana, came home and found him unresponsive, she waited nearly 8 hours before taking him to the hospital. David died 2 days later from blunt force head trauma. State Attorney Angela Corey charged Christian as an adult with first-degree murder, making him the youngest person in Jacksonville's history to face that charge as an adult. A judge later ruled his confession was inadmissible because a 12-year-old could not have knowingly waived his Miranda rights. In 2013, after a lengthy legal process, Christian pleaded guilty to the reduced charges of manslaughter and aggravated battery. He was sentenced to 4 years in a juvenile detention facility and was released on the 15th of January 2018, the day after his 19th birthday, with 8 years of probation. Aiden Fucci.
This is serious.
It's very serious.
This isn't no joke. This is your whole life. Your whole life.
He was 14 years old and had reportedly told multiple people in the weeks leading up to May 2021 that he was going to stab someone in the woods. Aiden Fucci and 13-year-old Tristan Bailey were classmates at Patriot Oaks Academy in St. Johns County, Florida. In the early hours of Mother's Day, the 9th of May, 2021, residential surveillance footage captured the two of them walking together around 1:45 inches the morning. A later recording showed Aiden running back alone in the opposite direction, carrying his shoes. Tristan's family reported her missing that morning. Her body was found later that day in a wooded area near their neighborhood of Durbin Crossing. She had been stabbed 114 times, with 49 defensive wounds to her hands, arms, and head. A knife with a fragment missing from the tip was found in a nearby pond, and that missing fragment was later recovered from her scalp during the autopsy. While investigators were still treating him as a witness early on, Aiden took a selfie in the back of a police cruiser, flashed a peace sign, and posted it to social media asking if anyone had seen Tristan. He was arrested the next day. During early court appearances, he was photographed appearing to smirk, though he later submitted a written apology before sentencing. In February 2023, just as jury selection was about to begin, Aiden pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Judge R. Lee Smith sentenced him to life in prison on the 24th of March, 2023. Under Florida law, the sentence is eligible for review after 25 years. Eric Smith.
And was this picture-perfect, cute, happy, athletic child.
He was 13 years old and growing up in Savona, a small village in western New York, and life had not been easy for him. Other kids mocked him constantly for his red hair, thick glasses, protruding ears, and small height, and he had been held back a grade and spent most of his school days alone. So, by the summer of 1993, there was a lot of pent-up anger in this kid, and it had nowhere to go. On the morning of August 2, 4-year-old Derek Roby left his home to walk to a nearby park program just down the street. His mother, Doreen, had let him go by himself that morning for the first time ever. He gave her a kiss and headed off. Eric encountered Derek along the way and lured him into a wooded area near the park. Once there, he strangled the boy and beat him to death with rocks. He also poured Derek's Kool-Aid into the wounds and smashed the banana from his lunch bag near the body. Police initially assumed the killer was an adult from outside town, but as the investigation continued, Eric became a person of interest. Investigator John Hipsch later recalled that when Eric was questioned, he described what he had done with a level of calm that was deeply unsettling to everyone in that room. He eventually confessed. Eric was tried as an adult, making him the youngest murder defendant in New York State history to face adult court. In August 1994, he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 9 years to life, the maximum allowed. He was denied parole 10 times before finally being released in February 2022, after 28 years in prison. Jacob Ind.
KKTV 11 News reporter Stephanie Ross takes us back to one of the most shocking murder cases here in southern Colorado.
He was 15 years old and living in Woodland Park, Colorado, and by his own account and the account of his older brother Charles, the home he grew up in was a nightmare. Their stepfather, Kermode Jordan, was alleged to have subjected both boys to years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, while their mother, Pamela, was also said to be abusive toward them. Jacob had reportedly been thinking about killing his parents since he was around 12 or 13. So by late 1992, he had moved from thinking to planning, and he enlisted the help of an 18-year-old classmate named Gabriel Adams to carry it out with him. In the early hours of the 17th of December 1992, while Pamela and Kermode slept, Jacob and Adams entered their bedrooms and attacked. They shot both parents, stabbed them, and sprayed them with bear mace in an assault that reportedly lasted around 5 minutes. Both were killed. Jacob went to school that morning as though nothing had happened. He told a friend what he had done, and that friend told the principal, who called the police. Jacob was arrested the same day. He was tried as an adult in 1994. His defense attorney made the controversial decision to keep Jacob off the witness stand, believing his flat, unemotional demeanor would turn the jury against him. Jacob was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. But that decision became the foundation of decades of appeals. In 2017, a judge vacated his convictions on grounds of ineffective assistance of counsel. Jacob pleaded guilty in 2018 to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was resentenced to 60 years. Given the credit for time already served, he was released on parole in September 2020, after 26 years in prison. Nehemiah Griego
spoke to his sisters sitting on the benches in the courtroom.
I am sorry for taking our parents.
He came from a family that was deeply rooted in faith. His father, Greg Griego, was a 51-year-old former gang member who had turned his life around and become a pastor, and also served as a chaplain to the Albuquerque Fire Department. His mother, Sarah, was 40 years old, and both parents were active in prison ministry and well known in their church community at Calvary Albuquerque, in South Valley, New Mexico. But on the night of the 18th of January 2013, 15-year-old Nehemiah walked to his parents' closet, picked up a .22 rifle, and shot his mother Sarah twice in the face while she slept. His 9-year-old brother Zephaniah woke up and asked what had happened. Nehemiah told him the truth and then shot him once in the head. He walked to the room shared by his sisters, 5-year-old Jael and 2-year-old Angelina, and shot them both. His father had been out all night working a shift at a homeless shelter, so Nehemiah waited. When Greg came home in the early morning hours, Nehemiah was waiting for him. He killed his father too. 5 members of his family were gone, and Nehemiah spent the rest of that day wandering the grounds of the family's church. Investigators later said he had also told them he was planning to drive to a Walmart and open fire on random people before eventually being killed in a shootout with police. He was arrested that evening at the church after a security officer called authorities. He pleaded guilty in October 2015 to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of child abuse, resulting in death. In November 2019, a judge sentenced him as an adult to 3 concurrent life sentences plus 7 additional years. He will not be eligible for parole until he is 52. Roxana Gabriela Sikorsky.
Jeff Sikorsky, the father of Roxana, following his adopted daughter's court appearance today.
She had been adopted from Poland as a young child, along with 2 siblings, by Lorene and Jeff Sikorsky, a family from Plymouth Township, Michigan, who gave her a stable home after what had been a very difficult early childhood. But by 2014, 15-year-old Roxana had been secretly seeing a 23-year-old man named Michael Rivera, and her parents had no idea. When they found out, they filed a statutory rape complaint against Rivera, and according to prosecutors, that is when Rivera began pushing her towards something far more extreme. He contacted her through the Kik messaging app, sending step-by-step instructions on how to kill each member of her family, including anatomical guidance on where to cut. On the night of the attack in October 2014, Roxana took an 8-inch fillet knife from the kitchen, crept into her 12-year-old brother's room, put her hand over his mouth, and cut deeply into his throat. He survived, though the wound was serious. She had planned to target her parents and another sibling as well, but she stopped. Rivera, who had been directing the plan remotely, was later arrested, tried, and convicted on all 7 counts, including attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Roxana pleaded guilty in February 2016 to 1 count of assault with intent to murder, with 6 other felony counts dropped as part of the deal. At sentencing in March 2016, she was visibly trembling and in tears, apologizing to her family and promising she would get better. The judge sentenced her to 10 to 20 years in prison. Michigan Department of Corrections records show she was released in October 2025. Antonio Barbeau.
2 teenagers accused of murdering a great-grandmother with an axe and a hammer.
The last murder in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, had been in 1996, so when news broke about what happened on the 17th of September, 2012, it genuinely shook the community. Antonio was 13 years old, and so was his friend Nathan Pape, and the 2 of them came up with a plan that afternoon that would leave the presiding judge saying he had not seen anything like it in 24 years on the bench. They wanted money for marijuana and pizza, and the target was Barbara Olson, Antonio's 78-year-old great-grandmother. Nathan's mother dropped the 2 boys off near Barbara's house on Westwind Bluffs, completely unaware of what they were planning to do. Barbara heard them come in through the garage and invited them inside, telling them she would call Antonio's mother to let her know he was there. And then the boys attacked her with a hatchet and a hammer. The medical examiner later testified that Barbara had been struck at least 27 times with both sharp and blunt objects. They ransacked the home, took roughly $155 in cash and some jewelry, and spent the money on what they had come for. Antonio had cognitive difficulties stemming from being struck by a car in 2009, and his attorney initially entered a plea of not guilty by mental disease or defect. But Antonio later changed that to no contest as part of a plea deal. He was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, and in August 2013, at 14, was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility at age 50. Nathan was tried separately, convicted at jury trial, and also received life, with parole eligibility at 45. Caleb Sharp.
Most of all, I am sorry to Amy and Emily for taking Sam from them.
In the weeks leading up to the 13th of September 2017, 15-year-old Caleb Sharp had been telling people around him that he planned to shoot up Freeman High School in Rockford, Washington. At some point, it was written off as dark talk, but he was not joking. He boarded the school bus that morning with a duffel bag containing an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, a handgun, and multiple boxes of .223 ammunition. At school, Caleb walked directly to a second-floor hallway, set down the bag, and pulled out the AR-15. The weapon jammed. While he was struggling with it, a fellow 15-year-old named Sam Strahan walked up to him and confronted him directly, saying he always knew this day was coming. Caleb then pulled the handgun from under his jacket and shot Sam once in the stomach and once in the face. Sam died from his wounds. Caleb continued down the hallway and shot 3 more students, injuring all 3, before school custodian Joe Bowen confronted him. Caleb raised his hands and surrendered on the spot. Nearly 5 years passed before the case was resolved. In January 2022, Caleb pleaded guilty to 1 count of premeditated murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and second-degree assault. In August 2022, Judge Michael Price sentenced him to 40 years in prison, well above what either side had requested. That sentence was later challenged on appeal. In 2024, a Washington State Appellate Court ruled that state law required an exact sentence of 25 years to life for anyone who committed aggravated first-degree murder before the age of 16. Caleb was resentenced in September 2024 to 25 years to life. Robert Bever.
Guilty to stabbing 5 of his family members to death last July.
For years, the family on their quiet street in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, was practically invisible to their neighbors. The parents, David and April Bever, homeschooled all 7 of their children and almost never interacted with anyone outside the home, to the point that some neighbors said they did not even know the family's names until after the murders. On the night of the 22nd of July 2015, 18-year-old Robert and his 16-year-old brother Michael attacked their family inside the house with knives. Their father David, 52, and mother April, 44, were each stabbed dozens of times. 3 of their younger siblings, 12-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Victoria, were also killed. Daniel managed to call 911 during the attack, and that call saved 2 others, a 13-year-old sister named Crystal, who survived despite being stabbed, and a 2-year-old named Autumn, who was found completely unharmed. Both brothers were arrested that same night. Robert later confessed that the 2 had planned to put the bodies into storage bins, hide them in the attic, steal the family car, and then go on a killing spree targeting random people at multiple locations, with a goal of reaching a body count of at least 50. Investigators said Robert had openly expressed admiration for serial killers and wanted that level of notoriety for himself. Robert pleaded guilty in September 2016 to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. He received 6 consecutive life sentences, 5 of which carry no possibility of parole. Michael was tried separately and in August 2018 was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. Both brothers remain in Oklahoma state prisons today. Dexter Johnson.
Next, we go back into the archives for a sentencing from 2007 in Houston, Texas. 19-year-old Dexter Johnson was found guilty.
He had turned 18 just a few days before any of this happened, barely over the age threshold that made him eligible for the death penalty. Dexter Johnson had dropped out of school after the 9th grade, and by the summer of 2006 was running with a group of teenagers in the Houston, Texas, area who had been on what prosecutors would later describe as a 25-day crime spree involving multiple robberies and killings. In the early morning hours of the 18th of June 2006, Johnson and 4 others were driving around Harris County looking for someone to rob. They spotted 23-year-old Maria Aparis and 17-year-old Huey Ngo sitting in Maria's car outside Ngo's house. Johnson approached on the driver's side with a shotgun, forced Maria into the back seat, and the group drove both victims to a secluded area. There, Johnson raped Maria before he and a co-defendant shot both of them. Both died. The murders were 2 of at least 5 killings connected to the same spree. 3 days later, Johnson was arrested on an unrelated marijuana charge and linked to the disappearances through Walmart surveillance footage showing Maria's credit card being used after she went missing. Investigators said he had been the group's leader throughout. A Harris County jury convicted him of capital murder in 2007 and sentenced him to death. After the verdict came down, Johnson threw a chair across the courtroom and had to be forcibly restrained and removed by deputies. He has been on death row ever since, with multiple execution dates set and then stayed by federal courts, as his attorneys have argued he has an intellectual disability that would legally exempt him from the death penalty under Supreme Court precedent. Austin Myers.
Because of your youth, though, you also have no concept of death. A 19-year-old from Warren County, now the youngest person on death row in Ohio.
The idea that he has no worth or value as a human being.
He was 19 years old, having just turned 19 3 weeks before the crime, and the plan he had been building was detailed enough that a judge would later describe it as methodically premeditated. Austin Myers had gone to school with Justin, back in Ohio during middle school, and even after Austin moved away, he had stayed familiar enough with the Back family home to know there was a safe there. He was convinced it held around $20,000. It actually had $70 in it. In late January 2014, Austin recruited an acquaintance named Timothy Mosley to help. The two drove to Justin's home near Waynesville and even stopped in for a brief visit, but they left without doing anything that first time. So Austin went and bought materials to build a wire garrote, using steel cable and metal rope cleats, and also purchased ammonia, septic enzymes, and rubber gloves, planning to use them to break down the body afterward. On the 28th of January 2014, they returned. Justin let them in. There was a struggle in the kitchen, and Mosley stabbed Justin more than 20 times. After Justin was dead, Austin fired multiple gunshots into the body. Then the two wrapped him in a blanket, drove him to a remote field in Preble County, and poured ammonia on the scene. Austin was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to death, becoming the youngest person on Ohio's death row at the time. He took the stand before sentencing and told Justin's family he was sorry this had happened. The Ohio Supreme Court upheld the sentence unanimously in 2018, and his case remains under ongoing appeal. Morgan Geyser.
Breaking right now at 5, 40 years in a mental institution. The sentence for Morgan Geyser, charged in the Slender Man stabbing.
She and Peyton Leitner had been best friends since they were small children in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And to anyone who knew them, they looked like any other pair of 12-year-old girl. But by the spring of 2014, Morgan had become genuinely consumed by a fictional online horror character called Slender Man, a tall, faceless figure that originated in a genre of internet horror stories. She and her friend Anissa Weier, also 12, had come to truly believe Slender Man was real, and that proving their loyalty to him meant killing someone. The person they chose was Peyton. On the 31st of May 2014, the three girls had a sleepover. The following morning, Morgan and Anissa persuaded Peyton to take a walk with them to David's Park, a wooded area nearby. Once they were deep in the trees, they pulled Peyton to the ground. Morgan pinned her down, and Morgan stabbed her 19 times with a 5-inch knife, while Anissa urged her on. Then they left, telling Peyton to lie still while they went for help. They did not go for help. Peyton dragged herself out of the woods, made it to a road, and was found by a cyclist who called emergency services. Surgeons later said one wound had come within the width of a human hair of killing her. She left the hospital a week later. Both Morgan and Anissa were tried as adults. Morgan pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide and was found not guilty by reason of insanity after being diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. In February 2018, she broke down in tears and apologized in court before the judge sentenced her to the maximum 40 years in a secure forensic psychiatric facility. She was released to a supervised group home in 2025, but cut off her monitoring bracelet within months, fled with a man, and was arrested in Illinois the next day. Martise Fuller.
Killing his ex-girlfriend and attempting to kill her mother in 2019. 15-year-old Kaylee Jugo was found shot to death in her bedroom.
What had started as a high school relationship at Bradford High School in Kenosha, Wisconsin, had turned controlling and violent by the time 15-year-old Kaylee Jugo decided to end it. Martise Fuller had been a standout student, an honor roll kid and varsity football player, and so had Kaylee, who was a cheerleader. But after Kaylee broke things off because of physical abuse, Fuller's behavior escalated into something that alarmed everyone around her. He began stalking her, showing up outside her home, calling and texting until she eventually quit her job just to escape the contact. His behavior got him expelled from school, and all the while, prosecutors said, he was building a plan that was as organized as a professional hit. He got a gun and ammunition through a friend, arranged rides, and on the 9th of May, 2019, broke into the Jugo family home. Kaylee was in her bedroom listening to music. Fuller shot her. Her mother, Stephanie, heard the scream and ran toward her daughter, and Fuller shot Stephanie multiple times as well. Stephanie managed to reach a bathroom, lock the door, and call 911, telling the dispatcher it was Martise Fuller. Fuller was tried in March 2021. For 6 days of testimony, he showed almost no emotion, but when the guilty verdict came back on all counts, he broke down and cried. It was the only visible emotion across the entire trial. At sentencing in May 2021, a statement was read on his behalf, in which he maintained his innocence. The judge told him he had no ethos, no regret, and no empathy, and sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. Andrea Cook.
I just want to say that I'm sorry for the wrong that her son had to get shot, because I didn't even know he was going to get shot. My boyfriend and his friends did train me to do this. I didn't even know what was going on until I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I just want to say I asked them for forgiveness for a second chance so I can get out and finish school and I can put my mama proud, because I want to be her first child to bring home a high school diploma. And I just want to make my mama proud. That's it.
The plan seemed straightforward enough to her at the time. 17-year-old Kyandria Cook and a boyfriend named Kendrick Bass used the dating app Meet Me in March 2017 to lure men to locations in the Daytona Beach, Florida area where they could be robbed at gunpoint. On the night in question, Cook got into the vehicle of a 27-year-old man named Perry Nida, who had a 17-year-old named Emmanuel Purcell with him. Cook directed Nida to stop somewhere, and not long after, the situation turned violent. Purcell was shot during the confrontation and survived. Cook and her accomplices then carried out a second carjacking that same night. Cook was 18 by the time she appeared before Circuit Judge Matthew Foxman for sentencing on the 27th of June 2017. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in state prison, and as he was reading those words out loud, Cook's mother, LaShonda Ponder, let out a wail that stopped the entire room. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing loudly enough that Foxman had to halt the proceedings entirely before he could even restate the sentence for the court clerk. Cook turned and asked if she could go to her mother. The judge said no, and Cook broke down too. The video of that moment spread across social media and was viewed millions of times. Cook later presented evidence that her attorney had told her she would likely receive only probation. The judge agreed to allow her to withdraw her original plea, and in April 2018, she was resentenced to 11 years plus 20 years of concurrent probation. Evan Ramsey.
Through evidence, trying to put together the pieces of a horrendous crime. But one piece will always be missing. They will never be able to talk to Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris.
His father, Don Ramsey, had been sent to prison for walking armed into an Anchorage newspaper office in 1986 and taking hostages over a rejected political letter. His mother then developed alcoholism, and when Evan was 7, his brothers and he were removed from her care and placed in foster care. Over the next 3 years, Evan moved through 11 different foster homes, and he and his brother later alleged physical and sexual abuse in several of them. By 1991, Evan had settled in the remote community of Bethel, Alaska, with a legal guardian named Sue Hare. At school, students mocked him constantly, calling him Screech after a nerdy television character. He had already attempted suicide at age 10. And so when, in early 1997, two 14-year-old classmates found out what he was planning to do, they did not stop him. They encouraged him, helped him practice with the shotgun, and on the morning of the shooting told other students to gather in the library overlooking the lobby so they could watch from above. On the 19th of February 1997, Evan arrived at school with a 12-gauge shotgun hidden under his jacket. He shot 15-year-old Josh Palacios in the student commons area, and Palacios died. He then shot Principal Ron Edwards twice as Edwards came toward him, and Edwards died too. When police arrived, Evan fired once in their direction before laying the gun down and saying he did not want to die. At sentencing, he stayed quiet until he was given a moment to speak. Then he said he was sorry. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and initially sentenced to 210 years in prison, later reduced on appeal to 2 consecutive 9-year terms. He will not be eligible for parole until 2066, at the age of 85. Fernando Salgado. It was the summer of 2012, and Emmanuel de la Rosa was running a masonry class during summer school at A.B. Miller High School in Fontana, California, about 55 miles outside of Los Angeles. Prosecutors alleged that de la Rosa, a 27-year-old career technical education teacher, had been using physical assault as a discipline tool, and that 18-year-old student Fernando Salgado was the one carrying it out. On June 14, 3 students held down a classmate, while Salgado allegedly pushed a broom handle into the victim's body. A week later, on June 21, it happened again with a different victim, this time with a piece of steel rebar. Police said at least 3 students were assaulted across the 2 incidents, and that De La Rosa had not only been aware of what was going on, but may have directed it in at least one instance. Salgado, along with De La Rosa and 3 unnamed minors, was arrested in late June 2012. He had been charged with attempted sexual penetration with a foreign object and assault with a deadly weapon, which together carried up to 4 years in prison. In July 2012, he accepted a plea deal. The sex charge would be dropped if he testified truthfully against his teacher. When he walked out of the courthouse that day, he broke down in tears, telling reporters he did not want to go to jail. He pleaded guilty to assault with a deadly weapon and ultimately received 36 months of probation and 180 days in county jail, served on weekends. De La Rosa went to trial in 2015 and was found not guilty on all 6 counts. Salgado walked away with probation. The man, prosecutors said, had been directing the abuse, walked away with nothing.